Hey everyone, this is Fahad, and welcome to Thoughtful Software. So, if you ever wanted to learn more about Skiplist and how we build great software, and also just in general how great software is built, this is the episode for you. We get into our backgrounds and values about software and how this has helped us have a very high success rate when building software. It's not to say one way is right or wrong, but this is how we approach it, and it's worked very well for us. So we hope you enjoy. Just basically, the premise behind this episode is really that at Skiplist, we believe that great software, is built on a strong set of core values. And so, you can find our values on the website. So our core values are simple over complex, caring over apathy, long term over short term, candor over cowardice, change over stagnation, team over individual, transparency over obfuscation. I like that one. Relationships over money. I like that one too. Iterate over perfect, and learning over ignorance. Um, and it turns out our clients share the same values, as well as do the people who work at Skiplist. And the result is really a high success rate of usable, incredible, and thoughtful software. And so along the way, we've also built some great relationships. And one thing we realized that actually quite a few of us at Skiplist have atypical backgrounds or unusual journeys that have kind of led us to come together and build great software. And so this is what we're going to talk about today: unusual journeys and great software. Uh, so let me kick it off. I have an EE background and an MBA. My parents are not technical at all. They've owned a restaurant for 20, 30 years and a travel agency. So I've grown up in this environment. And so kind of for me, the way I look at software is at a very personal level. What are people trying to build? What are their goals? Rather than like company goals, more personal goals. I really try to understand that as much as I can. And because I have a technical background, it helps me look at the technical limitations and possibilities while also looking at some of the personal goals of a particular person who maybe wants to build a certain project. Um, so that's my background. Charles, why don't you do a quick intro about yourself?
So my name is Charles Esau. I'm a senior engineer at Skiplist. I have a kind of a unusual background. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, northern Wisconsin, and didn't have a lot of exposure to technology. I did get some exposure a little early on when I was about 18 years old, working in manufacturing. And that created an interest for me. And I pursued that interest at a young age. I camped out in a small ISP office trying to get a job for about a month. I would go there a couple hours a day trying to meet with the owner. And eventually they hired me, but that afforded me the opportunity to start to get some context for technology and work with things, even if it was just helping people set up their email accounts. But from there, I kept on growing, learning, worked into building computers, hardware, working on networking, doing network engineering, and I eventually got into software, and that really became my passion over the years. So it's been a long road, and I continue to push to learn new things, and I think that's very much in line with a lot of the challenge we have at Skiplist.
Cool. What about you, Scott?
So for me, my name's Scott Stahl. Hi, everybody. I'm a software engineer at Skiplist also. My first experience with, I grew up with computers in our house. We had like an Apple IIe. My dad had an Atari 2600. I always loved video games and computers. Middle school, I, wrote some Visual Basic, like self-taught, writing some programs and took some computer science in high school. But my family was in the lumber business, and I decided to pursue the family lumber business. Thought that would be the right track for me. And I worked in the building material and construction industry for about 8 or so years after getting my wood products engineering degree from SUNY ESF. Go Stumpies. Um, so I did that, and after working there for several years, didn't feel fulfilled, and I went to a software boot camp called the Software Guild in Akron, Ohio, and ended up taking a job opportunity in Cleveland, uprooted from Rochester, and moved out to Cleveland, where I worked at a company with some current Skiplist people, and yeah, when Skiplist was founded, I got the opportunity to jump over here, and it's been it's been crazy. Changing careers and having a different experience, having some management experience in a different industry gives you some different perspectives. Learning the development part later, you come across, you look at problems differently than some people who have gone through kind of the standard track. And so I think it's been a benefit for all of us to have more people with different backgrounds at our company.
Interesting. And so, Andrew, our fearless leader and CEO of Skiplist, tell us your background.
Yeah, I have a non-traditional background, but in a traditional way. I come from a pretty rough neighborhood, and I obviously majored in computer science and then a master's in computer science from a top 10 school. But I had to work for everything. I had no money. Actually, started my 18th birthday, signed away $15,000 in debt, a student loan to Chase Bank, which I since repaid. But I find that my background is atypical from seeing where most people come from. But my dad was an electrician and a maintenance worker at factories. He still is. Actually works for Amazon now and works their maintenance for the robots in the facilities. So I've seen it all. I always find it interesting when I tell stories from my childhood. Most people look at me in shock and some disgust, but it's always great to meet new people. And I agree with you that I think the unique way we look at software here is because we mostly come from non-traditional backgrounds, and it gives us a different perspective on how software is built and the process for it all.
Well, maybe let's talk about a specific example. Like how does your background or just your different perspective come into actually building a project? Like walk us through something that might be related.
Yeah, I'll actually use a concrete example. I was talking to a customer today, and one thing I learned is growing up is people don't always ask for what they want. And, you can kind of tell that people are saying one thing, but they really mean something else. And so being able to be blunt and candid was something I got from my non-traditional background because I needed it to survive. And me just saying, hey, do you really mean this? And be able to be forthright, be candid with one of our values is incredibly important. Or I would have built the wrong thing, to be honest. I've wasted probably hundreds of thousands of dollars of this person's money doing it. And that's where our values come from as a company, is just things you see as you go along your journey that have been incredibly effective, like candor, to building great things.
Yeah, I think to follow on with what Andrew said, I have a similar experience where it's the people skills for me, where I, at my previous job, had some management experience and had some sales experience, and both of those are people-focused jobs. So a lot of times when we're talking with customers, you have to learn to hear what's being said, but that's not being said, or know that you haven't quite gotten, to what they are actually looking for yet. So yeah, I think sometimes when I'm talking to a customer, it's not just, okay, well, I'm not thinking about, what language am I going to write this in, or, the technical stuff. It's like, well, what's your problem you need to solve? And then we figure out how to get there, based on whatever your problem is. That's kind of what I've learned from my other experience.
Well, so I'm in Silicon Valley and I grew up here. You guys are in the Midwest, Cleveland area. Do you guys see any differences in how you approach software between techies out here and you guys?
Oh yeah, I see a huge difference. Anyways, I've actually lived on the coast, and I've lived here, obviously, still do. The biggest difference is people here tend not to invent their own problems. For example, I see a lot of over engineering done in Silicon Valley because they want to use the cool new tech, and so they're adopting Next.js, they're adopting things that most CIOs have never heard of. And here in the Midwest, people tend to be a little more pragmatic. And it leads to some boring software, but sometimes boring software is good software because it just solves the problem. And there's a lot more judiciousness when it comes to software here. Now, that can lead to some innovation issues, which we can talk about. And there's not really a advantage or disadvantage to one of them. It really depends on what you're looking for the solution. Now, I prefer to be more judicious with choice of technology, but that doesn't make people that just adopt the newest tech wrong. You always have people that adopt tech sooner and people that adopt tech slower. And there's a great book called Crossing the Chasm that covers just this on the adoption cycle of tech.
Yeah, I think, kind of to echo that, I think that the way we approach software and also the way I've seen other people in this area approach software is it's much more practical. It's let's find out what your problem is and let's solve that problem. And let's just do what needs to be done, because money is a finite resource and should be treated that way. Now, maybe in Silicon Valley it's not, but it seems that way in Cleveland. So we just want to, we want to do our job and do it well.
Yeah, I think what happens in Silicon Valley, and I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, is when you actually pitch your business to a VC, you say artificial intelligence. When you actually end up building it, it's only like statistics. And so there's a lot of show that happens out here, but really everybody needs to start from a very practical standpoint of what can actually be done in the beginning. And then, how do you actually layer in on, let's say, artificial intelligence? So like, for example, a lot of these traditional companies or companies that have been around a long time, for them to kind of jump into machine learning, they can easily be caught into, all the sexiness and, like the Watson and everything else. But really, we first need to start out like, is your data accessible? Is it scrubbed? Is it clean? And then go from there.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing I find is, people start with the tech first. I want to be a blockchain shop. Well, cool. What are you going to do with it? And they never know what they want to do with it. They just know they want to do blockchain. And it's not problem first, it's tech first. And that's okay. Like I said, you can innovate that way, for sure. Like we're going to use AI and we're not quite sure how we're going to use it yet. Some of the best inventions were done that way. I find some of the largest companies and some of the best products are always built with the user in mind first, right? Google is a good example of this. Their first thing was how do we get better results on search? And they invented the PageRank algorithm, and the rest is history. And very rarely, though, were they, going to start with artificial intelligence and work backwards from that. Granted, they're using artificial intelligence, but they've earned all that complexity through years of building on the basics and being really good at their core competency. And now their core competency is AI, or one of their core competencies. They have a lot of them because of their size. I find that when you start with the problem and you really explore the area around the problem, you find out what you need to do. And sometimes the answer is we need to use some machine learning, or we need to use some more advanced techniques to get the job done. And I think then you can adopt the tech and it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, you have to choose the right technology for the problem. And I think you're right that a lot of the people do lead with a lot of buzzwords and a lot of new up and coming technologies, but they implement it in such a way that is cost prohibitive for their business. Blockchain being a great example of this. And you see this, you see blockchain all over and everyone's touting blockchain. And blockchain is really cool. I love it as a technology, and it has a very unique purpose and just gets overused a lot. So what you see is blockchain is great when you need a distributed trust system. But you'll see a lot of implementations where you have a single source of truth implementing blockchain internally just to have that technology and to, be able to say that that's part of their offering. And that's great, but what is that really getting you that you couldn't have done with more traditional mechanisms? So I think knowing the right tools to use for the job is very important.
Is having too much hype one of the main or one of the key reasons why projects fail? If like people want to just jump into blockchain but not knowing what are the limitations just because they heard something about blockchain or their colleagues are doing it, or do you see a lot of negatives in too much hype?
Trendiness is bad, just in general. Like that's my opinion. If you are doing something because a lot of people are talking about it before the solution has proved itself out, and to be a solution for what you're talking about, if you're just attaching a hype word or a trend word to your supposed problem, then I don't know. I don't see a lot of success in that. So when I talk about practicality of solving problems, try to do it as simple as possible. The more simple you can do it, the more likely you are to get it done faster and have a better product at the end.
I actually find this conversation very interesting because it's for people from non-traditional backgrounds, and this conversation would be radically different if we were talking to someone that had a traditional background. I remember I do this all the time when we work with some of our outside engineers that are, computer science. Their parents have a technical background, and we argue a lot over technology, and people, they're really passionate about technology. I mean, we do our fair share, like Vim versus IDEs, but it's mostly just joking around with each other. But there are a lot of people that are really passionate about technology, and particular technology. Ruby is something that I say inspires a lot of zealots. And I see why. If you use it, it's a very friendly language and people really like it. But they will always tell you that Ruby's the right tool for every job, not just some of the jobs. And I don't know if it happens to be more traditional background people that have these strong opinions, but I find that to be the case.
Well, I want to comment on that if I can real quick. I do think that there is a corollary there. I think that the people who had to fight to get into this industry, yes, we like technology, but we know that there are, we had to prove out our problem solving skills first. We had to learn that stuff first. If you've just come in and it's been tech your whole life, then that's kind of all you know. I feel like at least I'll speak for myself. I feel incredibly lucky every day to get up and have this as a job. And so when it comes to that, I'm not going to waste my time arguing about this, that, or the other thing that's like small stuff. I think we just want to, keep doing an efficient, practical job so that we can, keep doing what we do every day.
So the downside of hype, one of the things that I read about is that, like, this MD Anderson, right? They were this cancer center that's in University of Texas, and they decided they're going to use IBM Watson and their cognitive engine to like eradicate cancer. That was the goal. And after I think hundreds of millions of dollars, they figured out it's not going to be worth it. Nothing's coming out of it. They're just too early, and they dumped them last year. They dumped IBM. And so jumping in too much of this hype too early can cost you actually a lot of money.
I saw firsthand, specifically IBM, really buying into hype and pushing products. And I saw them implementing technologies, even in the stack I worked in, not because they provided really any sort of solution. In many ways, they created more problems than solutions. But it was a lot to do with marketing and branding. And not to say that's wrong. That's driving business. It's creating energy and motivation. But it certainly does also create some inefficiencies. And IBM is a very large corporation. I'm sure they can absorb a lot of those inefficiencies and on the prospect of, driving forth new technology and new offerings. But, from a more practical sense, if you're not as large as IBM, you're putting a lot more at risk by shooting for the hype without a good solution. Anytime you're taking a square peg and pounding it into a round hole, you'll get there. And I'm not going to say that, buying into hype and developing on hype can't create a market for you, but it can create some inefficiencies, and knowing exactly what you're doing there, can make a difference from a business growth standpoint, as well as, a brand recognition standpoint. So IBM being a good example of that as well, where, they have done a lot of marketing, a lot of branding, and you've also seen them not be the most successful at it. So you're now hearing a lot of, stories about people who tried to go down that road and it didn't quite work out for them. So from that perspective, it can also come back and become a double-edged sword.
So let's go back to your background. If you're an executive, at an enterprise, you're not very technical. Let's just say you're not. How do you kind of navigate this? Because you want to jump into something that's interesting, but you don't want to. Anderson, they didn't know they were going to end up spending I think it was like $70 million on this project. How do you actually get yourself involved, but not too deep?
I think the biggest thing and this just goes for internal resources too, is not to give what's called entitlement funding to people. And that's to say, like, don't just allocate $75 million and spend it regardless of whether or not successful or not. I see that happen all the time in large enterprises, and it happens on these projects as well. What you do instead is you treat it like a small little startup, and you give them a quote seed round, right? You give them $100,000, $400,000 to prove the concept out. Is this even feasible? And if it is, and they make good progress with that money, then you give them quote a Series A. Maybe that's $3, $4, $5 million, and then you let them work with that capital. And it creates this sense of urgency because you have limited numbers to prove out, and people get scrappy and they get ready to do more with less, and that's incredibly important. And so maybe you don't spend all $75 million. Maybe you spend $100,000 to prove a concept that just isn't feasible, right? And obviously these numbers are made up, but you can prove concepts out pretty easily. You'll know whether AI is going to work on your problem without spending the entire budget on it. And I always advise people, you want to give the least amount of money possible to prove an idea out, so you're not just burning money on ideas that are impossible. And you can cut things off really early that way. I think one of the reasons startups are so successful is because they have to be scrappy, right? They get limited money. They have to make really good use of that money, and they can only get more by being either successful in the market by selling and getting customers, or by proving traction and growth to investors. And both can be incredibly difficult.
Yeah, it's iterate. It's the same way we write software. The way it's the way you solve any problem that you don't, you, especially if you don't know exactly where you're going. Like the kind of studies you were talking about, you're taking a guess. And so you've got to start with an iteration, and that's what we do. And again, one of the things that one of our bedrock principles is earn your complexity. If you've talked to any of us, you've heard us say that a million times. Start with something simple, see if it works, and then tweak it, and then only get more complex as you need to. And so these tools like AI and blockchain, they're great tools for what they do, but they are complex, and you've got to really, you've got to make sure that what you're doing merits that sort of complexity.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. I think people also need to understand where certain technologies kind of fit in. And I think that's one of the big challenges. Yeah, it's great to use AI, but for example, there's different artificial intelligence domains, right? So there's things that humans can do, but also AI can do as well. But you have to figure out what is it actually you're trying to build. And I think from what we're all saying from our backgrounds, we try to be initially very practical, and then build on that, and then balance in innovation and actual a deployment of a certain technology. Like, for example, like different artificial domains. If you're doing something around like detection, a computer could probably do that better than a human. If you're maybe doing something around like process management, a computer or some sort of intelligence could probably do that better than a human. But when you start getting into areas like recommendations or getting into an answer or reasoning, that's when like humans actually can do that a lot better, or maybe at the same level as computers today. So when you think about creating some AI doctor, or for like airlines creating some sort of fully serviced agent, is probably not there yet. There needs to be some sort of augmentation. So kind of fitting that into certain application is probably better to understand that up front and then find out what the limitations of the technology are today.
It's a difficult problem, especially for an executive, to see what is going to be the best technology choice to grow their business, solve their problems, things like that. And with that technology choice, you hope you got the right people in place that are giving you the best information they can. And to kind of iterate on, some of the previous comments, I think enterprise business, many of them are getting a lot more savvy about understanding how to fail fast, how to recognize revenue early in a lot of these larger enterprise offerings, multi-million-dollar deals of integration, things like that. You're starting to see quarterly and even monthly checkpoints that have to be met in order to recognize payment for said services. So as time goes on, I think the market is getting better about understanding, more agile methods of pure procurement and integration. But there's certainly a ton of examples of big failure out there as well, where people didn't iterate, they didn't start off small, and it led to catastrophic results.
Well, let's switch things up a little bit. The recent news was that Google and Apple recently ditched a requirement to have a college degree to join these companies. I'd be curious, like, why did they do that, and do you think it's a good or bad thing for software development?
I think it's a great thing, to be honest. I think anyone that has the willpower and the determination to want to do anything, they should be allowed to do it. I don't think we should hold anyone back. I think a college degree is a false gate that we create to separate people, and we lose a lot of talent and a lot of brain power that way. And if the future is truly computers, we don't want to lose a single smart person that wants to come into it. And obviously, we've hired people from non-traditional backgrounds. It's so important to me that we don't gate people. It only causes cycles to continue, cycles of poverty, cycles of ignorance. And we should tear gates down. We should tear ceilings down and make sure everyone has an equal chance to succeed and create a more fair world. I don't believe in the equality of outcome, but equality of opportunity is a must. And a college degree prevents that from occurring.
Yeah, I'm surprised it took this long, to be honest with you. I think most companies that are, most software companies that are worth their salt, are already looking past that, because especially when it comes to software, you can learn so much about someone, like with a lot of other jobs. You might not know, if you're hiring someone fresh, you don't know someone's accounting skills. If you're hiring an accountant, it's nice to have some sort of way to certify that, yes, this person knows what they're talking about when I'm talking about accounting principles. You're not likely to do a lot of accounting when you're 18 or 19. And so if you're hiring a 22-year-old, you want some proof that they know what they're talking about. When it comes to software development, you can write software, when you're 8, 10 years old. So you can hire someone at any age, and they can bring you proof of who they are and what they are. And that's by far the most important thing. Learning about what someone can create, learning about how people solve problems. That is so much more important than having any sort of college experience, any sort of college certification. I think those are, in this field especially, I think they're becoming, overpriced, wall decorations.
Do you guys look at a developer without a college degree differently, in terms of, like, what are you looking at, certain skill sets, or how do you stack them up, and what are you specifically looking for in terms of, are they really good at what they do? Are they going to fit within the organization? Things like that.
So when I'm looking at it, I tend to start focusing more on computer science, not as a bad thing, but as a way of saying, well, what do you know? What do we might have to teach you? You know, some of the computer science fundamentals are incredibly important: data structures and algorithms, multi-threading, techniques like that that you would learn in a traditional computer science setting that you might not learn coming from a non-traditional background. But you know, from that perspective, if you're a good problem solver, I can teach you the textbook things, right? Anyone that has the background in computer science could do that. But if you're not a good problem solver, it doesn't matter if you have the tools and techniques, because you're just not going to be able to use them anyways. So yeah, for me, I just look and make sure, well, where are you in terms of computer science, so we can teach you what you don't know. But it's not a disqualifier. For me, it's just a different topic we have to cover. If you come from a computer science background, I actually expect a little more out of you, because you should be well studied in algorithms and data structures, and you should know how they work and all of that. And also, graduating, I'd expect you to know some sort of problem solving and all of that.
Having an unusual background, or unusual journey to software, you get, I guess, the combination of street smart and book smart. A lot of companies who hire just straight out of, let's say, these top universities, you find people that are very theoretical, and they just put their heads down and they want to just code, but they don't really think about the business. I personally always think about that as like, how much value is this going to provide a company? Um, if you have like college requirements are no longer, there, you have all these diverse backgrounds, unusual, journeys. What does that say about the future of the workforce, let's say 20, 30 years from now? People are going to be coming from everywhere. And how are you going to figure out who's good and who's not?
You've got to get a really good sense at reading people. I think you've got to find ways of evaluating people that if we're getting away from this certification that says, yes, this person is, we have given them 4 years of education, we've certified that they've passed those 4 years. If you're not getting that anymore, we've got to come up with our own criteria. I think we're working on developing some of those here. But I also think that developing that kind of criteria is going to be, it's something we should have been doing all along. You can learn a lot about a person now. Especially, again, I come back to our industry. You can learn a lot about someone by the code they write. You can learn a lot about someone through a couple-hour discussion. And there's a lot of companies that are doing some more inventive forms of interviewing too, maybe a more rigorous form of interviewing where they're looking for you to solve real-world problems. Talk about a real-world problem and how would you approach this? How would you solve it? And you learn so much more about someone there than say, explain to me how an anonymous function works. Like that sort of knowledge, that like vocab testing, kind of what I think of it as. It's useful to an extent, but there's a lot of people who can pass those vocabulary quizzes who you would not want to work with. You really want to work with people who can think through problems in real time. And then if they, need to learn a technique, they can turn to, any of the smarter people at our company, or they can look it up on Stack Overflow. Like, it's there for a reason. You shouldn't spend your brain space on memorizing, some obscure things. Not that anonymous functions are obscure, but you shouldn't occupy your brain space with obscure knowledge when you can spend it thinking about how to solve problems effectively.
One of the very important things when evaluating candidates is really, their passion for what they're doing, whether it's the passion for the technology or the passion for the business and the outcomes of the business. And I think you can derive that either with or without a college degree. But it is crucial in that interview to do that assessment of, is this person going to be passionate about what they're doing, or are they here for a paycheck? And that's really about it. And that's the type of candidate that worries me the most, is the people that are looking to do the bare minimum to achieve their monetary goals. So when it comes to evaluating candidates, whether it's through examples like this, you can have a very spirited discussion around how would you solve this type of problem? I think that was a great example Scott gave of, how would you solve our real world problem? Even if that person isn't able to have the technical knowledge at the time, if they can demonstrate the passion and the willingness and it makes sense realistically, then you're probably interviewing a great candidate for a position.
My previous job, which was also my first software job, I differentiated myself by having an application that was actually deployed. You could, type in a web address and see my silly little vending machine application. And the interviewer really enjoyed that. And they said, I know you're not a college guy, but let me tell you, 50% of the people who come in here don't have something like that. And that wasn't something that was required, but I was like, oh, I wonder if I can do this. And so I think those sorts of things that are just, and that, again, that comes from the fact that I wanted to learn how to do it. So I did it. And then that communicated, as Charles said, communicated the passion that I had for wanting to do it. And so you have to look for those kinds of markers, and you have to have the people smarts to differentiate what's truly passion versus what's someone seeing this as a good paycheck.
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic discussion, and I think comes back to full circle. What we talked about in the beginning is, degrees kind of were helpful because it gave everyone a baseline of what you knew or what they thought you should know. Now, college degree might be optional. Really what we're talking about is what are somebody's values, what is their passion. And if you kind of have these core set of values and how you want to approach software, how you want to approach your daily life, how you want to, just live life, it really kind of sets the bar of, okay, this is a person that I want to work with. I can teach this person and they're going to, we're going to work well together. So I think it really comes back to just having a great set of values.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're entirely correct. I think, as I've said it several times already during the course of this talk, I think that problem solving is the ultimate thing. Problem solving is the thing we do in this business. That's the thing we do in this career. So validating someone's ability to problem solve is by far the most important thing. Coding development, while it's getting more complicated, is also getting easier in a lot of other ways. You're having a quicker uptime from just installing your set of tools to actually have a running web server. Like, you can do that with our tool set. We can do that extremely quickly. And so you don't need to have that low level knowledge on getting a web server up and running, because that sort of stuff is done for you. The harder problems, the very human problems of how to solve a customer's problem, are ultimately what we are doing here. And so that's what you need to, those are the skills you need to have now to be successful.
When you started the meeting here, you listed the core values that were up on the website, and as I was listening to them, I was reflecting upon that, and I really thought it reflected our team well. And at the core of that, I started to realize that a lot of this is, Skiplist is a lot more about innovation than it is just solving problems. We have a lot of very talented engineers who are capable of coming up with new and diverse ideas. We come from definitely a diverse range of backgrounds. We have college educated people, we have self-taught people. And it's great working with all of them. The one core value I'd almost propose throwing on top of that, which I think is really true at Skiplist, is empowerment over management, or something to that effect, because we are very empowered to make decisions, to work with clients, to come up with new and innovative ideas. And it's not just a job of churning out widgets.
Yeah, well said. I like that.
We all face adversity, but people that face adversity and keep going, those are the ones that will achieve success, and they're achieve greatness too. And the ability to think for yourself and go after what you want without quitting. I believe those are people that are destined to do great things. And those are the people we want here, and those people we want at Skiplist.
Thanks for listening to the Thoughtful Software podcast. We hope you found it informative. You can always check us out at skiplist.com. Talk to you next time.